Chapter 40, Vanquished. Fortunately, a superhero was present. Sunny side up! Holy begumba! For the love of Pete! Vanquished. And the superhero was enormously, inordinately pleased with himself. He felt immensely powerful. He felt like writing a poem. Chapter 41, I Promise. They were in the car. Flora's father's hands were on the steering wheel at 10 o'clock and 2. Flora was sitting up front, and Ulysses' head was out of the window. They were heading back to Flora's mother's house in spite of Flora's protestations. We have to go back, said her father. We have to return the regular Saturday afternoon time. We have to act normal, natural, unconcerned. Flora wanted to object, but she could read the writing on the wall, or rather, she could read the words that hovered above her head and her father and the squirrel. Destiny could no longer be forestalled. The arch nemesis must be faced. Holy bagumba, said her father. His right ear was wrapped in a huge amount of gauze. His head looked lopsided. Wholly unanticipated occurrences. A squirrel vanquished a cat. He shook his head. He smiled. And now it's time for another battle, said Flora. Everything will be fine, said her father. So you say, said Flora. It started to rain. Ulysses pulled his head back inside the car. He looked up at Flora, and the sight of his little whiskered face calmed her somehow. She smiled at him, and the squirrel sighed happily, and curled up in her lap. When I was a girl in Blunder Meeson, Dr. Measham had said to Flora when they were leaving apartment 267, we wondered always if we would see each other again. Each day was uncertain. So to say goodbye to someone was uncertain, too. Would you see them again? Who could say? Blunder Meeson was a place of dark secrets, unmasked graves. Terrible curses, trolls were everywhere. So we said goodbye to each other the best way we could. We said, I promise to always turn back toward you. I say those words to you now, Florabelle. I promise to always turn back toward you. And now you must say them to me. I promise to always turn back toward you, Flora had said. She whispered the words again now to the squirrel. I promise to always turn back toward you. She put a finger on Ulysses' chest. His tiny heart was beating out a message that felt like, I promise, I promise, I promise. Hearts were the strangest things. Pop, said Flora. Yes, said her father. Can I feel your heart? My heart? Said her father. Okay, sure. And then for the first time ever, George Buckman took both hands off the steering wheel while the car was in motion. He opened his arms wide. Flora gently moved Ulysses out of her lap and onto the seat beside her. And then she reached up and across and put her hand on the left side of her father's chest. And she felt it. Her father's heart beating there inside of him. It felt very certain, very strong, and very large, just like Dr. Measham had said, capacious. Thank you, she told him. Sure, he said, you bet. He put his hands back on the steering wheel at 10 o'clock and 2, and the three of them, Flora, her father, and the squirrel, traveled the rest of the way home in a strange and peaceful silence. The only noise was from the windshield wipers. They hummed back and forth, singing a sweet, out-of-tune song. The squirrel slept, and Florabelle Buckman was happy. Chapter 42, Foreboding. Her father pulled the car into the driveway and cut the engine. The windshield wipers let out a surprised squeak and then froze in midair, mid-wave. The rain slowed to a trickle. The sun came out from behind a cloud and then disappeared again. and the smell of ketchup melded with butterscotch rose with a gentle persistence from the seats of the car. "Here we are," said her father. "Yep," said Flora, "here we are. 412 Belgrade Avenue." It was the house that Flora had lived in for her whole life, but something was different about it. Something had changed. What was it? Ulysses crawled up onto her shoulder. She put her hand on him. The house looked sneaky somehow, almost as if it were up to no good, foreboding. That was the word that popped into Flora's head. The house seemed full of foreboding. Do inanimate objects, couches, chairs, spatulas, etc., absorb the energy of criminals? The wrongdoing among who live there? The criminal element had queried in a recent issue. It is, of course, entirely unscientific to assume such a thing, but still we are forced to admit that in this woeful world there exists objects with an almost palpable energy of menace, spatulas that seem cursed, couches that contain literal and metaphorical stains of the past, houses that seem to perpetually groan and moan for the sins contained in their environs. Can we explain this? No. Do we understand this? We do not. Do we know that criminals exist? We do. We are also terribly and unfortunately certain that the criminal element will be forever among us. And the arch nemesis, thought Flora, the arch nemesis will be forever among us too. Ulysses' arch nemesis is in that house right now. Do you remember the darkness of 10,000 hands? Flora said to her father. Yep, said her father. He wields 10,000 hands of anger. 10,000 hands of anger, greed, and revenge. He is the sworn enemy of Incandesto. He's Incandesto's arch nemesis, said Flora. Right, said her father. I'll tell you what, the darkness of 10,000 hands better stay away from our squirrel. He honked the horn. Home the warrior, he shouted. Home the cat-conquering superhero squirrel. Ulysses puffed out his chest. Let's go, Flora said. We have to do it. We have to face the arch nemesis. Right, said her father. Bravely forward, and he honked the horn again.